I revisited a story that's familiar to me and maybe to you, and it reminded me again that God, He works in strange ways, and there are times when He brings things to our attention that we weren't even thinking about a second earlier. It's a story about a professor who was just going through his mail one day and shuffling through the paper, and all of a sudden he comes upon this magazine. It wasn't even a magazine that was addressed to him. It somehow showed up in his mailbox for some reason, and he began to read, and as he opened the book, it fell to this title of this article that says, "The Needs of the Congo Mission." And he casually began to read this article, and he became consumed by these words: "The need here is great. We have no one to work the northern province of Gabon in the central Congo. And it is my prayer as I write this article that God will lay His hand on one on whom already the Master's eyes have been cast, that he or she may be called to this place to help us." And the professor closed the magazine, and he wrote in his journal, "My search is over. I found what my purpose in life is." And he gave his life to the Congo. I wonder how many of us are like that. You know, when something strikes us that we change our direction. We were going in this way, and then all of a sudden, a series of events just moved us to change everything. I wonder how many men enlisted in military service on December 8th, 1941, after December 7th, 1941, the date which will live in infamy when Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese. There's one such soldier I read about this week. His name was Jack Lucas. Jack Lucas, when he heard the news that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, these are his words: "That day, a cold chill came over me, and I was obsessed to seek every way I could get into the Marine Corps. I was young, but I knew I could fight." Young. He was 14 years old. He forged his mother's signature on consent papers and made his way to basic training. By the time they finished his basic training, they found out that this kid was only 14 years old. And they were going to, get rid of him. But he said to them, he said, "If you get rid of me, I will just join the army and I will use the Marine training with them." And they couldn't get rid of him. So they kept him in the army. Now, he wasn't a tiny 14-year-old. He was 5'8", 180 pounds, but a 14-year-old nonetheless. So he went on through basic training and finished everything, but they wouldn't send him to Japan. They just simply couldn't see sending this kid to Japan. So what did he do? He snuck on a troop ship, and he found his way on his way to Iwo Jima to fight one of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific theater. He was in a foxhole with his 4 comrades fighting the Japanese in a really relentless firefight when a grenade fell into their foxhole, and this by now 15-year-old soldier fell on the grenade to save his comrades. The grenade exploded, put about 20 holes in him, saving those other 3, and they walked out of the foxhole, leaving him for dead. But he wasn't dead. He survived this attack, and he was awarded later the Congressional Medal of Honor because something struck him to move him to do something that was greater than himself because he just couldn't stand still. How many men or women enlisted in the army after the World Trade Center came down? A lot of people are moved, aren't they, by a series of events that change their lives. Well, today we're going to meet such a man. His name is Nehemiah. You can turn your Bibles there. It's a pretty phenomenal story. I thought Esther was great. Nehemiah is equally wonderful. And here's what I want you to listen for, okay? There'll be several things in this story that may stand out to you, and it'll be a little bit like a smorgasbord. Choose what you like, if you will. I won't declare a lot of points today, but in the end, I just want you to see one thing. So take what you want from everything else, but in the end, let's remember one thing. So let's do the background. In Nehemiah, it's weird how the Bible is laid out. Nehemiah is not where he should be in the chronological order, but Nehemiah appears on the scene about 93 years after the Jews were allowed to go back into Babylon, or back into Jerusalem from Babylon. But Nehemiah didn't go. He wasn't even born when they went. He lived really by then in a lap of luxury. He was, doing a pretty cushy job, had lots of power. He was actually what's called the cupbearer to the king. And that sounds like it's an insignificant job, but every morsel of food that the king would eat, he would have to okay. Every drop of wine that the king would drink, he would have to okay. So he was sort of like in the secret service for the king. He was in a really cushy job, very comfortable, probably lived at the palace. It was a pretty nice gig until one day his brother comes home. His brother comes home and he goes to his brother and wants to know how things are going in Jerusalem. And so Nehemiah chapter 1, very beginning, it says, the words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. How are things in Jerusalem? Expecting good news, but not receiving it. And they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. So really, nothing has changed. It's just the way it was when we left. Sure, the temple's up, but there are no walls. It's still the way it was. And when I heard these things, I sat down and I wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. This news broke his heart, and he wept, and he prayed, and he fasted. And if you do all the math in this story, you'll find out that for about 120 days, he was just all messed up. Praying, fasting, asking God to do something, whether it's to use him or use somebody else. But he's conflicted in this moment that the people that I love, the city that I love is in ruins. And so listen to his prayer. He says, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We've acted very wickedly towards you. We've not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. I remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name, that is Jerusalem. They are your servants and your people whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. So this would have been a prayer that he probably prayed dozens of times daily. Lord, please, I want to do something. I want you to prepare the king's heart. I want you to prepare me. And then the day came when he was going to approach the king. He was going to go into action because prayer leads to action. After 140 days of prayer, he said, now it's time to move. I will be in the presence of the king today. And I am going to ask him something, Lord. And if you don't move, then I will die. And he was terrified. But he prayed probably like Esther did. If I perish, I perish. If I die going into his presence, defending my people, standing in the gap for my people, then that's just the way it goes. I love how he's driven. He's driven by a love for a people and a knowledge of God and what God can do. And so he moves. This week I read this story that absolutely enthralled me. It was about a man who did just that in a generation right before ours. His name was Roddy Edmonds. Roddy Edmonds was in World War II. He was captured by the Germans along with about 1,200 other soldiers. And he was brought into Stalag 9A, a German POW camp. And that night when they got there, they were divided into several different barracks. But he was the leader of all of these. He's the highest ranking military officer there. And the order was given, tomorrow morning, only the Jews will fall out. Nobody else. And he knew what this meant. That they were going to take the Jews from there to some concentration camp and they would be killed. By then they knew Hitler's final solution. And so Edmonds gives these orders. Tomorrow morning, everybody falls out. Not a man stays in his barracks. And guess what happened the next morning? 1,272 American soldiers stood at attention when the roll was called. And the commandant from this prisoner camp came out and he said, "You cannot all be Jews." And Edmund said, "We are all Jews." And he took out his Luger and pressed it on the temple of Edmund's head and said, "I will kill you if you don't tell me who the Jews are." And he said this. He said, "If you kill me, we will all know about it. And according to the Geneva Convention, the only thing we have to give to you is our name, our rank, and our serial number. And if you kill me, we'll all know. And when this war is over, you will face war crimes." And he didn't kill him. And he let the Jews stay. And after his death, all the way back in, 2015, he was finally honored. The Jewish nation gave him the highest honor, the Righteous Among the Nations Award. It was given to him in 2015, even though he wasn't there to receive it. And Ron Dermer, the ambassador to the United States, he gave a speech that day. And when I listened to him give this very brief speech, I was stunned. I want to read it to you. This is what he says, so listen carefully. It won't take very long. But he said this to the people gathered there. He said, "The Holocaust poses two difficult questions for all of us. Questions that both challenge our faith in God and our faith in man. First, how could a compassionate God allow the Holocaust to happen? Second, how could seemingly civilized societies produce so many individuals who would perpetrate such horrific crimes? In trying to grapple with these two questions, perhaps we should consider two other questions, two much older questions. There are two questions recorded in the Bible. They're the first question asked by God and the first question asked by man. After Adam and Eve disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden, we read that they hid in shame as they heard God's voice. "Where are you?" God asks. The sages of the Jewish people teach us that "where are you?" is not a question God is asking for his sake. It's a question God is asking for our sake. It is a question meant to spur introspection, to instill in us an appreciation that we are moral agents in the world, that we are responsible for the moral choices we make. Ladies and gentlemen, the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust were not victims killed in an earthquake, a hurricane, or some random natural disaster. That would understandably turn our eyes to the heavens for answers. The 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust were murdered by other human beings, by human beings who had a choice. So perhaps the question, "Where are you?" a question that so many asked God during the Holocaust and which so many of us have been asking God ever since, is not a question for us to ask God, but a question for God to ask us. Where was man during the Holocaust? Where was the moral compass of millions who simply looked the other way as the Nazis and their willing army of executioners perpetrated such monstrous evil? Rather than honestly confront this damning question, people instead tried to excuse their inaction. Too often they justified their failure to accept our moral obligation to one another by hiding behind another question. They answered the first question asked by God in the Bible with the first question asked by man in the Bible. It was the question asked by Cain after murdering Abel. "Am I my brother's keeper?" Ladies and gentlemen, we are all here tonight to honor a man who was his brother's keeper. We are here to honor a brave individual who saw his action not as an act of courage, but as his fundamental moral obligation to his fellow man. And that is precisely what makes him a true hero. He's a hero not simply because he had an answer to Cain's question. He is a hero because he had an answer to God's question. To the question, "Where are you?" he had an answer. In an age of so much indifference, he acted. In an age of so much cowardice, he was courageous. In an age of so much darkness, he was a source of light. So in honoring this righteous soul tonight, let us not only recognize his remarkable heroism, let us hope that his light will inspire us to live our lives so that we too will be able to give the right answer to those timeless questions, and in doing so, build a better future for humanity. What a phenomenal word. Where are you? Am I my brother's keeper? Nehemiah answered the question. Nehemiah, where are you at? I'm right here, God. If you want to send me, then send me. If I perish, I perish. And so he stepped up. He went into the king. And I love how it's described. He goes into the king, and the king had never seen Nehemiah upset before. He'd never seen him sad. Nehemiah was a happy guy, and you needed to be happy when you went into the king. Do you remember the story about Esther? If he doesn't lift his scepter to you, you're a dead man. If you're not making him happy, then get out of my presence and cut his head off while you're at it. So he wasn't trying to be not happy, but he couldn't help it. His heart was broken by what was going on. And the king said, why does your face look so down? And he said, I was terrified. And he said, may the king live forever. Let me tell you why. How can I not be brokenhearted when my city is in ruins and my people are in danger? And the king said, well, what do you want me to do about it? All right. Well, since you asked, king, here's what I want you to do about it. I want you to give me a leave of absence. Okay. Anything else? Oh, okay. Yes, what I want you to do is I want you to give me, clear passage to wherever I go so that nobody can stop me. Give me a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the royal park, so I can cut down trees and bring them with me to repair the gates of the city. And he just went on and on and on. It wasn't just, okay, I'm alive, just let me go. It's like, okay, king, keep it up. Bring me more stuff. And the king granted his request. And he sent a royal guard with him to guard him, like the Secret Service, to go with him back to Jerusalem. It's an incredible story. And so he goes back to Jerusalem. And imagine this, he gets there and he sees the destroyed city. And he sees the temple in the center, and he sees that that's great, but it's also been, kind of forgotten. And the city was in ruins still. So when he gets there, there's opposition right away. There are these three antagonists: Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. You'll hear their names come up over and over again. And every time you hear it, their threats intensify. But here, they just kind of show up, and they're upset that he comes to rebuild the walls. And so when Nehemiah gets there, he doesn't tell anybody what he's there for. He just gets there. And that night he went around and he inspected the walls. He wanted to see what was going on. And what's so amazing is there were some parts of the wall that were so messed up that the horse couldn't even pass through. So he just, stepped off of his horse and he walked the city. And he saw the broken down walls, and he saw how awful it was. And he thought to himself, how is it that 93 years have passed and nothing has happened? And so he went back to the guys that he was with, and he said, guys, let's rebuild the wall. We can do it. He inspired hope in these men, and he gathered the people of Jerusalem together, and they began to rebuild this wall. And as they're rebuilding this wall, Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, they just mocked them. Oh, if a fox came up on this wall, it would fall over. I mean, come on, you guys aren't builders. You don't know what you're doing. And you know what? They were right. I mean, he wasn't a builder. He was a cupbearer. He didn't have any calluses on his hand. He was a simple man who sat in the palace and enjoyed his job. But he got to work and he inspired them. And I love what it says. This is such a beautiful story of teamwork. He brought them together. And if you read, I think it's in chapter 3, there are several phrases that just keep coming back again and again and again. Next to them, and next to them, and next to him, and next to him. This group of people was building, and there was a group next to them, and then next to them, and next to them. They were all together in this, rubbing shoulders together, working on building this wall. And they were a diverse group. Goldsmiths were there, and perfumers were there. I don't even know what a perfumer is. Priests were there, and Levites were there, nobles and peasants. Everybody showed up to work on the wall. Nehemiah did a great job of inspiring and saying, we're not just building a wall. This wall says something about this place. It speaks to the glory of God. Well, maybe some people were just doing it because they were told, but those that really understood, they were doing it because they knew that God had called them to do it. And then the threats. They became worse. Not just, oh, you guys are stupid for doing this. It's never going to last. Now it's, if you keep building, we're going to attack. And if you'll notice as you read, more and more and more opposition came. More names of people that are trying to threaten them. But in Nehemiah 4, verse 6, it says, so we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with their hearts. But Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed. They were very angry, and they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted guards. Isn't that great? We prayed and we posted. It's sort of like, continue to pray, but keep your powder dry. Be ready for a fight, but be ready for a fight, but continue to ask God to do these things. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out. And there's so much rubble. There's no more rubble than there used to be. In fact, there's less rubble, but the people are getting tired. We cannot rebuild the wall. Also, our enemies, before they know it, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and they will kill us. Well, that's what they said to us. Then the Jews who lived near came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack. There was this constant danger, and everybody knew it. It's kind of like Paul saying, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We know the threat, so we post these guards and we pray. And then, and this is so beautiful, pay attention to this one. They put them together in family units. Mom, dad, and children building the wall together. I mean, that's a big deal, isn't it? Dad is like, you mess with my family, you're messing with me. I will fight for my family. He called out the dads and said, defend your family. And he encouraged them. I love verse 14 of Nehemiah 4. After I looked things over, I stood up and I said to the nobles, the officials, the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes. I love this. He calls them out and said, nothing else matters but your families. Now fight for them, build for them. Don't you quit. We see this is important. Do you know why? Because it is important. Mom and dad, nobody has greater influence than you do. Nobody should be thinking spiritually like you do. This is so important, and Nehemiah knew it. And a transferred principle would say that our faith must be transferred to home. Fight for your faith at home. Fight in prayer. Fight as you practice your faith in front of the people that you love the most. Fight for their purity. Fight for their biblical principles that are being absolutely eroded and thrown away. There are so many threats to us today. It's ridiculous. It's all over the place. You may be the only voice of reason because what they're hearing everywhere else is nonsense. But you have a voice. Fight together to the glory of God. And if you're a kid in a family, imagine some little boy in this family that's building a wall. He may think, what do I have to offer? I'm just handing dad a trowel. I'm just mixing cement. What good am I doing? I couldn't be doing any good, and that's just not true. I don't care if you're 3 years old or 13 years old or 18 years old. If you're in a family, God has ordained you to be there, to be a part of it. This isn't your mommy and daddy's church, okay? This is your church. You belong here. We need you.